recently read a book. Good.
Well, that author really missed it, didn't he?
It's several books, but this was Lucius Beebe, who was he was quite
Oh,
a
really?
famous author. I think he worked for the New York Tribune, and
Yeah,
he owned a railroad car and with his partner Charles Clegg, and very good photographer, a great writer, fun to read his prose. But
very famous.
but that was the era he was talking about diesels, and you see the there's the Zephyr 900 horsepower and an articulated lightweight train, and there's the UP 10,000, M 10,000. These were small, lightweight, fast, but very lightweight trains, and so the railroads are a very capital intensive, slow industry. And I worked for as an engineer for the utility, and the utility is also a very slow, capital intensive industry that doesn't change very fast. So, but he said, yeah, there'll probably be just some diesels by the year 2000, but steam is still going to be the main type of locomotive. Well, that was in the mid 30s. And so my question that popped into my mind is, why did steam locomotives disappear so quickly in the 1950s? I mean, they were just there and then they were gone. I mean, here's a 1950 locomotive, very modern, 300 psi, I think it is. Quite efficient, superheated, got a feed water heater, all this stuff. And along comes General Motors with the FT freight locomotive, and all of a sudden Santa Fe orders 350 of them right off the bat, because they said, oh, this is great. Why? Well, number one thing, it's all economics, obviously economics. I read another book that said if the railroads had not found diesel electrics, they would have been out of business by 1970. Steam was so expensive to operate. Yeah. But diesels do not need water. The Santa Fe used to have to haul water to New Mexico and Arizona and the panhandle of Texas, because the water there was bad and they didn't have enough of it. And so that's very expensive. Plus the steam engines need to stop every 100 miles, depending on the size of the tender, every 50 or 100 miles for water.
Right.
The diesels, the railroads were just shocked. They require 1/10 the labor hours per hour of running, because when the diesels got to the end of the run, they'd look at them and say, "I'll check the oil, check the water, give it a good inspection, turn it around, and run it back." Whereas the steam engine,
gas tank,
fill the oil. Fill the fuel, and but other than that, all the steam engines, and they later on they got to run, the Santa Fe were running their locomotives 1,500 miles, the steam locomotive, but they still had to go to the roundhouse. They had to clean the flues. They had to empty the ash out and lubricate them manually and stuff like that. So it was a lot. And then, of course, that means diesels can run longer distances without maintenance. I mean, the Great Northern would run they kept their passenger F units in Havre, Montana. They would run them to St. Paul, turn around, run them to Seattle, run them back to Havre, and then they take a look at them. So, I mean, that's very
a lot of distance,
a lot of distance,
a lot of hours on the road.
So now we're going to get into the other big economic thing, is that diesels scared the railroads because they cost about 4 times as much as the equivalent steam locomotive. But the payback was so fast, they couldn't believe it. And one thing, in addition to the water, the maintenance, the diesels basically use 1/3 of the fuel. And so you look at this. I made this slide to kind of make it a dramatic point. Look at the size of the tender on the 261. Now that was built, that's a very modern engine. It was built, I think late 40s or around 1950. It's got all the features on it. But look at the size of the tender, and then look at the fuel tank on the F7.
I see.
And they'll go the same distance. And here's water and battery.
Well, that big tender is carrying water as well as fuel, but that's
right.
beside the point.
That's right.
You have to do that on a steam engine. So
That's
the
right.
comparison is true.
Yeah. Really
Tender
is.
versus little tank.
And
I
so
look at today's diesels and they'll have a huge tank under there, but that's because they run them how many thousand miles without refueling.
that's right.
That's the economics too. You buy your low sulfur fuel in large quantity in certain places in the country, and you run your engines in between fuel tanks, refill tanks. That's what you're doing.
That's right. And you can buy fuel at a reasonable cost then and don't
Yeah.
hold the train up. So to get back to physics, a British thermal unit is a BTU is the heat required to raise 1 pound of water 1 degree Fahrenheit. It's British, of course, English system. So most of us in our houses have a 70,000 BTU furnace or 100,000 BTU furnace, something like that. To heat water, say if you're going to boil water, you take a pound of water, which would be a pint, and at 70 degrees, and you heat it up to 212 degrees. Now it's still a liquid. You need 140 BTUs. Now for the steam locomotive, you're going to need another 120 BTUs because it's at 175 psi. So you're going to need about 240 BTUs. But now you've got liquid at boiling, but it's not boiling yet. To boil the water, you're taking those water molecules are in long chains when they're liquid, but as a gas, they're individual molecules. So you have to break those chains. That takes 944 BTUs, and that's the killer for steam cycles and steam engines.
Yeah. Heat of vaporization.
Yes, the heat of vaporization, exactly. So you've lost the 142 or 242 BTUs. That heat is lost. It goes out the chimney. So the heat to boil the water goes out the chimney. And so all you've got is you've got the extra heat and pressure of having the steam at 200 psi. That's all you've got. That's about 6%. And that's the energy that goes to the pistons and the wheels. So that's why they're so inefficient. So it's that boiling that water, and there's no way to condense it because you can't. They tried it in South Africa, but all that did was get them water in dry areas. But you can't recover that energy. So we'll just go through a few of these. But in 1825, they were running about 100 pounds. That's 335 degrees, about 3% efficient. Then they increased the pressure to about 150. They're up to about 4%. Then 5%, 1925, about 6%. And then by 1940, they had superheated feed water heaters, all sorts of things. The Norfolk and Western and some of I think the Milwaukee might even be, that might be at 300 PSI too, probably 700 degree temperature, but it's only about 7% efficient. 83% of the energy goes out the chimney. 10% is lost through boiler lagging, approximately, depending on how much insulation is around the boiler. So 7% gets to the wheels. Okay, we'll compare that to the FT. So we have about 7% going to the wheels. The FT comes along, and the diesel is about 25% efficient. About 25% of the energy from the oil gets to the wheels. The stack loses about 10%, and the radiator is about 65%. Well, they kept improving diesels. By 1965, it was up to about 30%, and now with computer-controlled advanced technology diesels, they're about 35% efficient. They're quite efficient, and so that's 5 times as efficient as a steam locomotive was in 1940. But we see why they disappeared so fast. And then I thought,
take long to pay for something.
Sorry.
Doesn't take long to pay for something.
No, not at that with those kind of. So I thought, well, since I used to work in a power plant, I thought, well, let's compare it to a power plant. In 1925, they were running about 250 pounds in the boilers, water tube boilers, like Greg said, and the temperature was about 500 degrees, but they're about 15% efficient. Now, why? Well, we'll look at that. And then in 65, they'd gotten up to the 3,500 pounds. The Allen S. King plant over in Stillwater is 3,500 pounds, very advanced. The steam pipes are like this, and there's a hole in the middle like this, because I mean, They're advanced molybdenum and all sorts of alloys and stuff because it's 3,500 psi, but they're 38% efficient, so they've done pretty well. They lose about 12% out the stack and about 50% to the cooling towers. And then we'll talk about a combined cycle. They're getting up to 55, 60% efficiency now, and we'll show how they do that. So here's the steam turbine. This is why in 1925 the steam turbine was twice as efficient as a steam locomotive. The steam locomotive uses the steam once, goes to the piston, it's gone, then it's blown out the chimney. So you can see here the steam's coming down. Here's the throttle, and it goes through all these stages. And each time it goes through the stages, it loses a little bit of pressure, but that pressure loss, that energy is driven into the shaft. And so there's like usually 15 to 20 stages. Then the other thing it does is it goes to a condenser, and there's a big box underneath the turbine that's full of pipes full of river water. And so that condenses the steam because it's very clean water, so they can run it back to the boiler. But what it does is instead of exhausting to the atmosphere at 14.7 psi or whatever it is, like a steam locomotive, this is virtually a vacuum. It's less than a tenth of a pound, like a 50th of a pound of pressure. This is essentially a vacuum back here. So you get that extra boost there because now you're exhausting into a vacuum. So so these were about 15%. And eventually they got them up to about, like I say, the L&S King plant's about 38% efficient. And so we look at the combined cycle has a gas turbine and a steam turbine. The steam turbine runs about 1,200 psi, 1,000 degrees, but the whole thing overall is about 60%, 50 to 60% efficient. Now these are the same gas turbines that here we see a 777. That's a 90,000 pound jet engine. Well, the power industry, here's a Siemens, has taken that turbine and put it on steroids. You see, it's even bigger. And so that produces, these things produce, like 150 megawatts, 175 megawatts. And they're quite efficient turbines. So what they do with a combined cycle plant is they bring in natural gas, they burn it in the gas turbine, and again, that's just a very big jet engine. It drives the generator, and you get 175 megawatts of electricity. But the exhaust, what they figured out how to do is take that exhaust at 1,000 degrees, and then you run it through a boiler. It's just a plain old water tube boiler. And that boiler gets enough heat just from that exhaust gas to run the steam turbine. So they usually put two of these things in at, say, 150 megawatts, and that'll run 150 megawatt steam turbine with basically no fuel. And so that's how you get to 60% efficiency.
Okay.
And that's why the Riverside plant in Minneapolis, the High Bridge plant in St. Paul, and there's hundreds of these plants across the country. Gas is more expensive than coal, often, not I guess it's getting more expensive again, but when you're getting 60% efficiency versus 35% efficiency, yeah, it's pretty